y in range 5, right? We're saying run this loop 5 times. So that's an example of when we would know how many times you want it to do, right? So a really good example is if you have like a class of students and you want to kind of maybe calculate their grades, you can just loop through it with how many students you have. So I have 50 students, when I get all their grades, just loop 50 times to get that. I know definitely how many I will have, right? Reduce complexity from using while loop. So we saw before when we had while loops with the same programs, they were really complicated, right? Even just adding numbers together or looping through something a specific number of times, you have to make a while condition, you have to set the variable beforehand, and you have to find a way to break out of the loop. In this case, it's very simple to do loops like this. So it's a good also way good to use a for loop. And then if you want to kind of loop through a list slash string slash sequence. There are other things you can loop through that you will learn in the future, right? But for now, we kind of went over looping through lists and looping through strings to get each specific character. So that's also a good way to do that. Instead of doing something really complicated, this is very simple, right? So that's kind of 3 ways of why we would use for loops, right? So it's kind of to summarize like this basic part. Okay, so we also have, we can put conditions, just like in our while loop, we can put conditions inside our for loop. Okay, so if we break this program down, you know, piece by piece, we're saying start at 1, end at 10, right? And then increase by 1, which is the, again, we end at 10 because it's 11. We know from this is saying is if I divide the number by 2, is there no remainder? So does it divide evenly? So that's saying, is this saying if it's an even or an odd number, right? So you can see here this is an even number and this is an odd number. And this is kind of how you check it. We went over this. For example, 4 divided by 2, it divides cleanly back into 2. It doesn't have any decimals or any kind of things left over when you divide it. So that's how an easy way to tell if something's even or not. So in this case, what happens is at each iteration, it takes the current number, which is I, and then it either prints if it's even or odd, and then it goes to the next iteration. It doesn't stop the loop because there's no break. It will just process that I value in some way. So if I run everything here, if I run this code, right? Obviously, because we're counting up by 1 to 10, it's just going to switch. So it's odd, then odd, then even, right? So you can have conditions inside your for loops, right? As the same with while loops, but it doesn't have to break out. It can just finish like that. Does anyone have any questions about this? I think we're okay. Okay. Feel free to ask at any point if you're confused about something. Okay. Just like our while loop, we can use break and continue. So we have a list of numbers here. It's going to go through every number and it's going to check. If the number ends up being greater than 15, we're going to break out of the loop. And if not, it's just going to print that number. Pretty simple function, right? So 15 is not greater than 15. It's equal. That's why it printed. So it just went all the way up to here. And then it checked. 20 is greater than 15. So it broke out of the loop. Again, pretty straightforward. We can break out of while loops. We can break out of for loops. And sometimes maybe there is a reason. So usually when you have range, there's not a lot of reasons you would bring. It depends on what you're writing. But in examples like these, where you're checking through a list or a string, you might want to break for a certain reason, right? If I had a list of scores or grades, again, with the student example, I could print out how many grades are kind of below a threshold or a level. So above or below a certain number. And then I could see how many of that is, right? Okay. I think this function is very interesting. So we can also use continue. And with continue, right? So continue puts us to the next iteration, while break stops the loop completely. So if I hit this continue, I go all the way back up here. So how this program is working is I have a name, right? Mariah Vinian. And I have a count that I set to 0 because I want to update that within the for loop, but I don't want to reset it back to 0. That's why it's on the outside. Then for every character in the name, so I'm going to loop through each one of these characters here, right? Because we can do that with for loops. I'm checking. If the character is not M, then I'm going to continue. Right? And I don't run anything else down here. I go back all the way up to this iteration and I go to the next iteration, right? And if it is M, then I add to the count. And we can see here we're trying to print the total number of M's in this name. So if I run this, we can see there's 2, right? Because it's going to sort of the first M. Since it is the character is equal to M, we increase the count. And then through this, right, A is not equal to M, so we continue, go to the next character. R, go to the next character, right? So if you want to skip iterations because something happens to whatever you're looping through, you can also do that, right? Okay. Does anyone have any questions about break and continue? Okay, I think we're good. All right, so that's kind of the review portion of having our for loops